Welcome to this webinar on global educational learning in non-formal settings. And we are going to look at 3 different contexts and look at what is the role of non-formal learning in global educational learning. We have 3 presentations, and I would like to first welcome Alexis Stones from UCL, who is going to look at and tell us about the embodied peace education through praxis, museums, and informal teacher education. Alexis Stones, you're welcome.
Thank you so much for having me. We have lots of presentations, so I will crack on and aim to just speak for 15 minutes, so we have more time for questions. We're talking about the informal and non-formal approaches to global education, global learning, and I'll be looking at peace education as well. And hopefully you'll see from this presentation that the work in museums is certainly straddles many different disciplines and approaches. So it seems to be well suited to that informal education or non-formal education, because the parameters of specific disciplines aren't entirely clear. Not to mention the fact that in museums we have the general public as well as students and teachers all interacting together all the time. So just to start off, I will be drawing on some work that I've done with my good colleague Al-Karim Datu, who is based in Sindh province at Subra University in Pakistan, and also the edited volume for the Earth Charter, for which I wrote a chapter on this, both of which are available and easy and can be downloaded by colleagues on the call here if you're interested. So art in the public sphere, and why is it important for peace education, for global learning? So let's start with Habermas and Juergensmeer. Habermas tells us that we mean a realm of our social life in which something approaching public opinion can be formed. So it's an important space. It is an informal space on the one hand. It is also very formal in the sense that it's curated by certain authorities. Access should be guaranteed. And it's a place where conversations can take place, where, you know, disputations, protest, etc. We see human rights lived out or not, for example. And so there's this kind of informal relationship between the state authority and the public as well in that sphere. So just to sum up, democratic society needs democracy to be visible in this public sphere. And to think of Juergensmeer and his contribution, he really identifies the fact that these collective identities are articulated in material ways through these expressions of symbol, ritual, monuments and built spaces. So they really are important spaces for us to think about. At the moment, I think in the last 5 days or so, Banksy, the famous anarchic artist who started out as a graffiti artist, goes by his sort of anonymity as part of his brand. A very political artist. This is right now in Whitehall, very, very close to the Houses of Parliament in London, in England. I know we have people from lots of countries on the call. And there's a huge excitement about it because it gets put up in the dead of night. No one knows how long it will be up for, but it certainly is a statement that's drawing a lot of attention. And just wanted to include it briefly because we have local elections in England soon, and there's a huge concern about the rise of the far right and a party called the Reform Party, and this flag, this image of blindedness and walking and the precariousness of the figure on that plinth is definitely part of this discussion that Banksy is opening up for us. So when I look at the work that I'm going to present to you with student teachers, we want them to engage at that sort of level of kind of closeness to real life politics. So if you go in just round the corner from that statue, there is Churchill. He's often spray painted. He's often attempted to be hauled down, like many of the statues that we have around the world. More recently, in 2020, following the Black Lives Matter movement and culmination in the protests during 2022, the owner of enslaved people, Edward Colston, who is memorialized in Bristol, was pulled down by crowds. I mean, it made international headlines as well. But this journey has been so interesting because it really was an example of democracy in action. There had been many examples of local effort strategies to remove the statue, but none had been successful. And then in the height of the protests for Black Lives Matter, the statue was pulled down, dumped in the river, then rescued from the river, and then put in the museum. And I just think this is really interesting, following the questions of Jürgensmeyer and Habermas. How did you feel when Colston's statue was toppled? You know, really inviting us to engage with this history before our eyes, questioning of history. Lots of artists and think have really engaged with this now bare plinth, and just to highlight Manuel Akure, who is a living entrepreneur and artist, and this was, you know, on the day I found myself on the plinth telling a few stories, that day changed my interaction with the rest of the world. Okay, so a really powerful place that's now become something that is more open to democratic dialogue, perhaps. I work in the National Gallery, who are very understanding of the positions that I take with some of these. And sometimes when I'm working at the National Gallery, Just Stop Oil will call in for a visit. And this again may have made international headlines. You know, they're protesting about the money that is spent on these very, very, very expensive, valuable paintings here, whose money is tied up with, you know, fossil fuels, oil, etc. So they're protesting. This is a protest of, of theatre. It's artistic. It draws attention. It makes headlines. It's, you know, it captures the attention of the general public to engage with these urgent issues. It's a fascinating approach to protest. Now, I was really interested because I work with pre-service teachers in the National Gallery, and I want them to be as politically engaged as these Just Stop Oil people, the people from Just Stop Oil who are curating these protests. But I know that it's not available to everyone. You know, there is something rather safe about the worlds, perhaps, that these people live in. There's something safe about all the protesters in Bristol, who were huge in numbers. So I was looking at ways that this might be curated pedagogically. So starting with UNESCO's call for an approach to peace education, which needs to be participatory, needs to be dynamic. It needs to nurture the ability to value human dignity, to take care of ourselves, each other, and the planet we share. A lot of the people in Just Stop Oil, for example, deal regularly with being in prison for the protests that they do. I don't want to put any of the student teachers through any of those processes, of course, but I don't want to limit their political engagement. So again, there's this call for a sort of pedagogical protest. So the museum seems a public space. You have to have your bags checked, but nonetheless, there's certainly a lot of them are free. We're lucky. It's a non-formal place of learning. You know, there aren't fixed places of sitting. There is a formal collection. Of course, it does have formal elements to it, but the learning tends to be non-formal, more fluid, less static. There is a place for there's democratic possibility. I'm suggesting it's a place for peacemaking and this idea of pedagogy as curation. So the process that I'm going to tell you a little bit about draws on Augusto Boal's participatory theatre. and it works with pre-service teachers or student teachers as collaborators. It's based on my own reflective practice and an arts-based research lens. Okay, so we're working with the arts as a method to develop this research and this knowledge. I take a vignette, so it's an example of many occasions when I have done work like this, but sort of they're condensed into one vignette as an example of the kind of work that we were looking at. And the museum then becomes a metaphor for curriculum just at the end. So we start with foregrounding the lived experience of the pre-service educator. So as opposed to this kind of one size fits all, you must jump through this hoop, develop this competency, etc., we're starting with them. We have many pre-service teachers, at least 80%, often 90 to 100% from diasporic communities. There is an importance of agency to enact social change for all teachers, all educators. And there's this week in the gallery, it's immersive, it's experiential. But the nature of the National Gallery is a very Western European art collection. So if you imagine Michelangelo, Leonardo da Vinci, etc., there are colonial histories there explicitly, but also implicitly, and huge issues with colonial white supremacy representation there. Okay, so I wanted to turn the whole focus of this pre-service teacher education into working with developing their own roles as teachers, as educators, as opposed to a deficit model in which they're learning how to teach these paintings that they don't know anything about yet. Wanted to start where they were. Sorry, folks. Right. So colonial histories, as I said, and representation, Leonardo da Vinci, Michelangelo, etc., Angelo, etc. So I would start with this. Initially, I would start with this for problematize immediately the kind of white Renaissance representation of Jesus of Nazareth for Christians. Offset that with a more global understanding of Christianity, which of course was useful, powerful, a helpful heuristic, certainly. Nonetheless, it was very intellectual in some ways, and there was something else that was needed. So I was looking at the work of architect, illustrator, and author Sabah Khan, and was I'm just taking an excerpt from her graphic novel here. It's an autobiographical one, because this was what helped me develop something to a method to work with the student teachers. So Green Street, which is in East London, Green Street is full of colour, all the colours of a post-colonial world. Maybe that's why we get lumped into groups. We're living reminders of the empire's history, reminders the rest of the country doesn't want, let alone see. I never saw our culture, our dress, our identity as not being normal. It was always around me. So as far as I knew, it was just part of the way we were, until it wasn't, until she went to university. And stepping out of Green Street and into higher education, it was the subject that I had chosen, architecture, that told me the loudest and hardest, you don't belong. So this sense of belonging was really key. And I wanted to look at ways that we could engage more thoughtfully, mindfully with the paintings in the collection at the National Gallery. So as well as sort of intrigue about the histories of some of these paintings that we would look at, there was also a sense of alienation. I was really recording this over many years. Outrage, withdrawal, discomfort, detachment. What does this have to do with me? So there was a sense of recurating the public space that I thought was needed. And a reminder that the experience of colonization doesn't have to be lived in real time. It can be known through one's history, through one's heritage. we know from the work of funds of knowledge, that people's knowledge, skills, insights, passions, histories can be known through our connections. And I wanted to, again, foreground that. And this is less known and less recognised in the English conventional curriculum. So I'll just sort of speed on, folks, if that's okay, because I don't want to run out of time, but this is some background to the idea of funds of knowledge, and also the importance of recognising oneself as an educator, one's own development, one's own histories, so that one can be, be brave and encourage that in one's students. I'm talking about the pre-service teacher encouraging that courage in their own students. So to draw on Bell Hooks, her complaint, the styles reflected in the teaching were of a single norm of thought and experience. Imagine that static Renaissance painting that just has to be learned about, the paints that we use, the techniques, the period, but less political engagement. So this really want to encourage that talking back that Hooks really, really talks about and really, really promotes. And it's so important because this hegemony of the collection is a metaphor for the conventional curriculum. And this notion of cultural capital seems to be given so much weight, certainly in England these days, that there's a fear that that political impulse is not having a voice because of the importance being laid on an already existing cultural capital. So Forum Theatre, quick background, developed his work in the 1960s and 70s, working in Brazil, generating the courage to challenge authority, and a great quote that sums it up: the theatre itself is not revolutionary, it's the rehearsal for the revolution. So it's enacting it. So I thought really useful, suitable for the potential theatre of the museum. So he works with people, as I mentioned, in Brazil. It's very much about challenging oppression, external oppression. And then over time, as his work becomes more popular, he travels to Europe and discovers that the oppression is internal. So then he develops a whole new approach, which he calls Rainbow of Desire. And I'm going to show you some examples of that in a moment. So there are some links with therapy, but I want to be clear, we're not saying that school or the museum is a place for therapy. It certainly isn't, but there are links, to heighten that value. This idea of the cop in the head, the negative inner voice, these are important aspects that the therapeutic setting will take seriously as well. So this is our painting that we looked at. This is the story of Alexander of Macedonia invading Issus in Turkey on the border with Syria in 330 BCE. It is recounted in this Renaissance painting as something heroic, something wonderful. He has invaded the family on the left-hand side. This is the family of Darius. He is with his army on the right-hand side, his horses, his dogs. And the story goes, the legend is that the family get his best friend, whose name is Hephaestus, confused with him. And they beg for mercy, but they beg for mercy to the wrong man. At which point the real Alexander steps in and says, do not worry, he is another Alexander. In other words, our friendship is so close that you are forgiven for confusing us. And this is the kind of fascination about this painting, according to the sort of National Gallery, typical of the kind of like Renaissance interpretation at the time. So in other words, no thought, no interest is given to the trauma of invasion, the subsequent genocide, the elimination of these people and their power. Okay, it is definitely Alexander the Great's point of view, but as you all know, in certain settings, he's certainly not known as Alexander the Great. He's Alexander the Bad. Okay, so we go into this painting in a lot of depth with the student teachers to really look at that power imbalance, the horse on the right, the horses on the left, the dog on the right, the dogs on the left. There's a real, there's nobody has a chance on the left-hand side of this painting. And yet the seriousness and the horror of it is not, as I've said here, it's really whitewashed. There's a single voice that's being told, the marginalized voices, it's glamorized, and there's a kind of masculine identity that's coming through here. So the student teachers, they've kindly lent their images, but they are somewhat muted. They enact this frozen position. So can you see the person on the right is imagining that they are Alexander, and the person on the left is the queen defending her land. And then we go into this rainbow of desire. We imagine that this queen, who is the same person who is sitting down with her arms outstretched, we imagine she has all of the powers that she needs, her people, her faith, her land, her heritage, and the student teachers come up one by one. And this is this embodied courage. And it's there's no need for agreement, there's no need for consensus, there is a range of responses, and this will be explored, discussed. And then it's taken further to go back to that situation of Alexandra on the right overpowering her, but being aware of the strength, that she has behind her. She then has the power to say, leave my land, leave my people, leave my family. And this is how the story ends for them. So they change the story. They change the way history has unfolded. And they do this in front of the painting, in front of the general public, in front of each other. So it has a certain power of the public space. They alternate roles so that everyone has played a part. In the final discussion, after coming out of character, they ask how it's made them feel. They've explored feelings of powerlessness, discrimination. It reminds them of partition, playgrounds themselves, or when they're teachers, reminds them of Thanksgiving, the violence of Thanksgiving, so-called Thanksgiving, and this idea and the experience of women having no voice. And then when they change the scene, when they challenge that power imbalance, claim that balance for the queen and for her family, power is restored. There's balance, there's peace, there's community, there's justice. So they have experienced that for themselves. So it seems to be worthwhile. We're telling, in the words of Achebe, we are telling the story of the lions and not the hunters, which is so needed to be told. Pulling it out of the frame and really drawing on Galtung's idea, the conflict triangle, the cultural, structural and direct violence. Is that cultural violence that seems to be so hard to ascertain, hard to challenge. It's only when the direct violence happens that's more perceivable. But we're going upstream. We're looking at that cultural violence. We're looking at that structural violence, which really informs the curriculum, and challenging it, looking at decolonizing it, even when we're hearing those early stories from the first time. So it's a template for the student teachers to challenge a lot of the colonial stories that they're being asked to teach. Carrying on, folks, it's drawing on their agency, their worldliness as well. They are managing a range of intersectional identities and heritages and pasts and potential futures, as well as they're becoming teachers at this crucial stage of their life. So this is a real time to be acting their values. And just to nearly finish, we're looking to recurate the public space. So with an intervention, with a retelling that enacts and stimulates that creative imagination of justice, Justin Bawal's words, that it's a rehearsal for the peaceful revolution, and that empathy of playing the parts of the invaders, playing the parts of those invaded as well. And just before I finish, it would be, if there was more time, it would be, or perhaps next time, to think of it even as a multi-species event, because these animals, non-human animals here, present all sorts of questions for us too. The horse on the right, Bucephalus, was, according to legend, tamed by Alexander and his entourage. But to what extent is that horse free to invade? To what extent is that dog free to invade? And just lastly, there's a really interesting detail in this painting, in that the painter Veronese painting at the time, this was a gift for a family. He had to paint very, very quickly. And so the mixing of the paint and the pigments and the application of it didn't last over time. So those horses have started to fade. And the background behind the horses is showing through. And it's often a really interesting metaphor because we don't know if it was intended. And so it's an area for hope, for discussions of hope, or what might it mean with student teachers or anyone who is engaging with this painting. What might it suggest if we're looking at something that somehow offers a different future to the one that the invasion presents us with? And we certainly don't know the answer to it. There are no answers on the back of the painting. So it is a real opportunity for speculation and invention and imagination of the future. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Alexis. And I think we may have new ideas and, of course, questions as well. And we move forward with our exciting topics and themes of today. And next, I would like to invite Andreas Pregler, who is artist and youth worker in Cham, Germany. And your presentation is on art and nature, a combination for the future. Welcome, Andreas.
Thanks a lot. Let's begin. My lecture is about art and nature and a combination for the future. My name is Andreas Pregler. I'm working as a visual artist in the field of contemporary art and as a certified social pedagogue in the field of extracurricular cultural education for children and young people at the Office for Youth and Family in the district of Cham, Germany. I hold a Master of Fine Arts degree and a diploma in social education and social work. I want to tell you 3 stories today. My lectures consists one chapter, chapter 1, master thesis that look me to the forest 1380, and chapter 2, the resulting participation in the international exhibition Documenta 15 in Kassel 2022 as me as an artist, and chapter 3, the transfer to the workshop series for children, teenagers and young adults named Forest Art as me as a social worker. First, some facts. The Forest Art series of events was launched as part of the extracurricular youth education program. Group dynamics are employed to encourage a forward-thinking approach to the forest ecosystem. Children, teenagers and young adults are encouraged to engage with the forest using all the senses. Creative and artistic activities help them to emphasize with the ecosystem. The results of this process reflect resonances. Various steps lead to future-oriented actions, such as the joint planting of forest trees. Municipal youth work provides broader support and oriented towards sustainability. It takes an interdisciplinary and systemic approach, focusing particularly on gender equality in the everyday lives of children, teenagers, and young adults. It actively promotes gender equality. It secures political support from numerous municipal committees and their elected representatives, not least through committed networking, which has an impact beyond on the regional area. Combining a regional issue such as bark beetle infestation with its consequences and global climate change mobilizes young people promoting sustainable development at the local level. Engaging with schools and educational institutions enables teachers to develop the skills and brings about holistic transformation of learning and teaching environment. This program was developed by me as a visual artist and a social worker. I give the project an interdisciplinary significance. The education areas are higher education, extracurricular education and training, non-formal and informal education. The thematic focuses energy, globalization, intercultural learning, cultural diversity, climate, human rights, sustainable cities and communities, responsible consumption and production, decent work and economic growth, ecosystems, biodiversity, reducing global inequality, sustainable development goals, and water. And the Program topics are learning environments, whole institution approach, building capacities of educators, youth action, and local level action. We are looking for all these sustainable development goals. There are no poverty, zero hunger, health and well-being, equality, education, gender equality, clean water and sanitation, affordable and clean energy, decent work and economic growth, industry, innovation and infrastructure, reduced inequalities, sustainable cities and communities, responsible consumptions and production patterns, climate action, life below water, life on land, peace, justice and strong institutions, and partnerships for the goals. Now, Chapter 1, my master thesis that took me to the forest 1380, because the research question was, does something come into being while walking? My artistic research took me through the border mountains between Germany and Czech Republic, between Bavaria and Bohemia. This densely wooded low mountain range reaches heights up to 1,400 meters, nearly 4,700 feet. This region has experienced a turbulent history. Before the Second World War, people lived peacefully together on both sides of the border. After the war, they were separated by the Iron Curtain. Barbed wire, death stripes destroyed villages on the Czech side. With the Velvet Revolution of 1989 on the Czech side, this changed. Border crossings were reopened. People found each other again. Parts of the forest became a national park and a nature park. The Czech name of this is Národní Šumava, the rushing one. This area has been severely impacted for several years now. Climate change is taking its toll. Water scarcity and strong winds are increasing. Monocultures of spruce forests, which previously generated financial returns, are now at risk. The spruce trees can produce very little resin and no longer able to defend themselves against the large numbers of engraver beetles and bark beetles. The result, clear cutting. The place of walking is near the border, or it's on the border. You see it here between Prague, 200 kilometers from there, Munich, 200 kilometers from there, and there you have the red line, there we are. Normally, it's a place of peace over the borders. In the middle of the border street, I was signed by me in a performance with a peace stone. Peace stones are creating a special relationship between these both countries. And the conceptual artwork of mine was titled Peace Project, Czech and Germany. But this is another story. Here we are now in the Bavarian forest, and you see a lovely view to the forest and the Šumava. Some nice views to the landscape from the far. But if you look more closely, you get dramatic insights. In a big area, you will find bark beetle infestation, like here in the forest piece with the number of 1380. The bark, here you see the bark and the beetles inside the bark. The delicate structures due to their aesthetic appeal are destructive to the tree and life-giving to the printers, and relate the concepts of loss and gain. But the general offices in our country say, give the order to cut all these trees, to bring them out of the forest, so that other trees are not infested. But then you have the next problem. There are no protection for the trees now. Strong winds knock down other trees. What you get is dystopian landscapes. Turn up. So, as an artist, I began to make the forest piece 1380 to my laboratory and my outdoor studio for my artistic research. Here you see the first performance of a trilogy titled Turn Up. The second performance was titled Unfolding, and the third one, Lying Down. Transformation are the next kind of research. Here I'm working with the different imprints, doing imprints for new landscapes. And another kind of research are the different plants. The monoculture of spruces is not longer sustainable. The future lies with the deciduous trees like the beech. So I blended, I faded to show some transformations in videos and photos. And to bring the audience in my forest studio, I'm doing performances like reading Franz Kafka, The Transformation. And to bring the results of the artistic research to the local audience, I create an exhibition titled 1380 in the local museum called World Art Museum Castle Altransberg, showing some videos, installations, and objects. Some impressions, like here with wax, show you around, footprint, modern wood, and the performance videos. And I included a workshop for young people looking, drawing, thinking, head, heart, hand, creating with barks. Chapter 2. To bring the concept to an international exhibition. I get an invitation to Documenta 15 in Kassel on 2022 based on the concepts of my masterwork. This World Art exhibition has, among other things, a focus on ecology. A part of entrance fees of the exhibition goes to ecological interventions. Some months in front of opening of exhibition, we are planting trees in an area where they have the same ecological problems and bark beetle infections. The documentation of the exhibition was written. Andreas Pregler works as a conceptual artist. In his videos, installation, and performances, he explores the degree of order and intermixing. Embodied knowledge, embodied feelings, and autoethnographic elements flow into his artistic research. In Kassel, he addresses dystopias and transformations in the Anthropocene. The artistic work of mine was embedded in an environment of Atelier van Dieshout from Netherlands and Collective Masarte Masaxian from Colombia. We had a table in the middle of was a magnolian tree. We had a film and a performance stand. We had an autonomous transport, and we had a truck. Here you see Jonathan Collin from Masarte Masaxian. And here you see the Collective Ara-Gruppen with South America from Barks. And now a little overview about the showing, what we showed, which art we have done. Our artistic work with artistic lectures was titled Forest 1380. We do conversation with the audience in the tent. We make performance titled Forests and Human Beings. There we do the big barks from this forest and do it on the people, and the people come out very slowly. And you see that it was a very quiet performance and was an embodied knowledge for all the actors. Our artistic intervention, a performance with participation, was titled Sitting On, Standing On, Performing On. We are giving the trees a second life. Here are some impressions of the audience and the people visiting the exhibition. Next lecture was From Circle to Change. We discuss circles, autonomy, and changes. We made a performance, Shaman Goes to 1380. The content was cheap wood infested with bark beetles is shipped from Germany to China. In the performance, Andreas Pregler and the Collective Ara-Gruppen demonstrate this problem using infested logs. The piece draws on boys' performance, Show Your Wound, and updated it with music from the Indonesian gamelan musician and composer Udana. Next lecture was, Is This the End? Embodied knowledge and artistic research take place in our everyday life. Nature, urban space, and human beings can participate but are often caught between hope, waiting, and action. Is this the end? First part was in the tent. The second part outside with the audience and the people from the exhibition. And we showed films on the screen in the tent. We make an artistic reading, Franz Kafka, The Transformation. We read the whole book. Then we do a performance titled We Are One. We test how close our bodies are to nature. Do our bodies filling with clay, making scratches like the bark beetles, come together, standing up and going to the fresh water. Chapter 3, Forest Art Series. Now we go back to the piece of forest and I show you the concept for the young people. The beginning in the normal is when we are starting, we are speaking about the room's landscape, about sculpture and object, about land art, about Richard Long and Annie Goldsworthy, about forest and ecosystems. We are ready for exploring the forest and collecting material. Then we are ready for the first embodied feelings, standing on cutted trees, smiling, hearing, feeling around, giving the trees a further life, growing up, moving like a tree, moving in the wind, feeling nature around, thinking what a tree can do. Then we are ready to create together or as a single. Building new houses, time to make a break, to relax, to eat, to drink, to speak together, creating with branches, getting larger, creating with leaves, a present for the forest spirits, painting with ecologically degradable colors, creating new waymarks, finding wounds, like Joseph Beuys said, show your wound, having a look for the little one, climate future on the way forking. Now we have to look for the collecting water. We find little water around the forest. And we find some living beings on the stones that lay in the water. And at last we are giving back something for the forest, a gift. We are planting together a deciduous tree like maple, chestnut and beech. In times of climate change, these trees can grow up in this area. Take your hands, giving you collected water. A fence is being built to protect the tree because deer and red deer like to eat the young plants. And finally, the young people have the opportunity to fill out the questionnaire. There is the possibility of self-reflection, and we have the opportunity for evaluation. And the future, It takes 2 until 3 generations until after a war again, somewhat normality between the population this and beyond the border occurs, and it takes 2 until 3 generations to grow a forest. The young people can gain embodied knowledge and embodied feelings through their actions. The experiences can be related to the growth of the forests. This can help them better cope with actions in the future. So it's a big package and a heavy work for the future. Thanks a lot for attention.
Thank you, Andreas, for the
Thank you.
forest art series. We got an experience of that. And as I said earlier, please keep your questions until later. We still have one more presentation before we allow questions and comments. And now I would like to invite Anna-Lisa Klages from Technische Hochschule in Ingolstadt, and to talk about the theme on global education through artistic handicraft production, exploring potentials for situated inquiry on informal global education in Uganda. You're welcome, Anna-Lisa.
I am very thankful to be here. I'm very thankful to all of you to have come forward and to attend this seminar. I do want to today sort of give an exploratory presentation on some notions that I took out of my PhD research. Saying this, personally, I am not an educational researcher. So everything I looked at today stems from my PhD research, but I looked at it from a different perspective. This is going to be a bit exploratory, and we'll see where it takes us. What I want to do in the upcoming minutes with you is first I want to sort of give you an overview that I call here setting the scene, investigating the situatedness of handicraft production in contemporary Uganda, which was the focus of my PhD research. However, I do want to focus more on parts 2 and 3 of the content that I'm sharing here, and that is setting the focus on artistic handicraft production as a site of non-formal or even informal global education, and on handicraft production. I do make a difference here, and you'll hopefully see where I'm trying to go with this in a minute. And then I'll close off with a few closing remarks. Okay, why did I, as a white Western European researcher, do research in contemporary Uganda? The reason for that was because I worked in the international development industry, and as such for a small private international NGO. And I came to realize working for this NGO that the promotion of handicraft production was something that many local and international NGOs promoted in their so-called development projects. And they did that with 2 major goals, I'd say. One was the promotion of what they considered sustainable development, although it was hardly ever clarified what sustainable development actually meant. However, there was a particular focus on so-called vulnerable social groups, meaning groups within societies that are classified as being particularly vulnerable because they are read as female, because they are read as disabled or underprivileged because of their socioeconomic or educational backgrounds. What I came to understand, that there were 2 things that really caught my attention here, was that there was a lot of meaning with regards to who is vulnerable and what is sustainable development that was being negotiated in this public sphere. And I really, really liked the quote that Alexis brought up from Jürgen Habermas about the meaning of public spheres that played a pivotal role in my research as well. However, what I saw here is that the public sphere was sort of really dominated by NGOs that were considered as civil society and the singular most important civil society actor. Also with the notion of being able to promote democratization, especially in countries of the global south. And I realized that there was a very important gap between the linkages between the creative industry that under which artistic handicraft production for many of the actors involved falls under, and its dynamic with civil society dynamics. And because of that, I decided to focus in my research both on artistic handicraft production within the realm of civil society dynamics in the broader context, so to say, of international development. So that was my original focus in my research. And I'm not going to go into any details, but to just sort of give you a very messy and very brief overview of what I looked at. Is I try to reconstruct who are the important social worlds, meaning collective actors, but also non-human actors who are involved in negotiating what I call here the cultural crafts industry in civil society. And I came to understand that there are many actors that I would have anticipated being there, but there are also actors that I did not anticipate necessarily to form part of this arena. For instance, the tourism world that we can see here, and also very importantly, but maybe to a certain extent, also very, very, very anticipatable, the world of customers. So what I came to understand in my research is that there are sort of two discourses that occur at the same time. And Peter Eke, a Cameroonian scholar, calls this the dual publics of post-colonial African realities, where we have a very present public discourse on the associated meanings of cultural crafts or artistic handicrafts in civil society as them being able to promote sustainable development, gender sensitive empowerment that are very important for the construction and the safeguarding of cultural heritage that has been significantly, of course, altered, but also stolen, reframed by colonial intervention and colonial in the colonial era, and something that I did not necessarily anticipate, but wasn't super surprising for me to find out, is that in this, what I call it a sort of dominant discourse, ancestral worship plays an important role as well in associated constructions or meanings of cultural crafts in Ugandan civil society. However, what I also found, and this was something that did not necessarily reappear in internationalized and Western-dominated discourse, were the functions of artistic handicraft productions, in particular, and their functions and also their agency in reconstructing or renegotiating gender roles, in establishing cultural or political agency, with a lot of leverage, especially at the communal and regional level. Its functions and its agency in creating social security and conviviality, and it's simply in parentheses being an act of spare time leisure activities. Now, thus far for setting the scene and telling you a bit about what I did so that you can sort of get an understanding of where I'm trying to come from now. As I said, in setting the focus, I want to sort of explore the possibility of conceptualizing or understanding both artistic handicraft products and production as site of informal global education. And I would like to start with this quote by Hume that I find very, very pointed and who elaborates sort of on the agency of artifacts, artistic handicraft products, which are indeed very times perceived as souvenir art. I'm reading the quote now. Here Hume writes, as an artifact of tourism, the humble souvenir serves many purposes. From the perspective of the producer, the souvenir needs to represent the culture and heritage of the tourist destination. That is his or her home or part thereof. The more notes of heritage that can be tastefully invested in the souvenir by the maker and recognized by the consumer, the better. So what we see here is a moment of interaction and negotiation, but I would argue also of education, because even though we need to take into consideration power imbalances that are at play here, there is a brief moment of encounter between two people who affiliate and associate themselves with different culture, who come into a very brief encounter, and through this encounter learn through the agency of the artifact about aspects of the other's culture. And this goes both ways, because of course there's sort of the anticipation of the tourist who has an association about a particular culture in question that he or she wants to find symbolized in the artifact. But there's also sort of a cultural interpretation of the producer who makes assumptions about what the tourist might like in terms of aesthetics, in terms of size, and in terms of shape. To finish the quote here, Hume further writes, an object made from a material indigenous to the tourist destination is a good start. If the object represents some aspects of the destination's heritage, then all the better. So what we learn here is we have both material and immaterial components that can be clearly distinguished as being part of a people's cultural heritage, and the question of, where does that cultural heritage come from and who decides that is part of the negotiation process that of course is to be conceptualized within a broader discourse on cultural heritage and culture and heritage regimes, but it's also something that happens within these very brief moments of encounter that I want to perhaps conceptualize as brief moments of informal global education. To sort of provide you or tap further into that direction, what I found in my research material very prominently, that the question of the traditional and the contemporary, and what traditional and contemporary mean, and what is included and excluded from that, is also very prominently negotiated by these collective actors who enter and exit this arena. And I just want to very briefly read the product tag here. This is a photo that I took at one of the craft shops that is very, very stereotypical for a Ugandan craft shop. So the product tag here reads traditional Uganda baskets. These beautiful baskets have been hand woven by a women's group on the slopes of the Rwenzori Mountains in western Uganda. Made out of millet straw, banana fiber, and raffia, and colored with natural dyes extracted from plant material, pure nature. Okay, what we can see here is a framing of a product as being traditional, while in fact, both the dye materials and the patterns and the coloring that we see are quite contemporary. Here too, we have sort of moments of encounters, though I would argue of a lesser encounter than if there was a direct contact between a producer and a tourist who would potentially buy the product, because we don't have a moment of encounter, and what we can see is a sort of a local assimilation process to what has been referred to as a white gaze, on a white tourist gaze, and I'll have a quote on that on the next slide, to what is considered to be authentic Ugandan, authentic African even artifacts. At the same time, and this is the third time we're going back to a museum. Here I'm taking you to the 2022 Venice Biennale, where Uganda had its first inaugural national pavilion. One of the exhibiting artists, Achai Chirunen, purposefully deconstructs those artifacts that you saw on the previous slides to merge them into installations and sculptures that purposefully break with this very white tourist gaze. And here I would argue, this educational moment enters where a very stereotypical white Western perspective on what is authentic African art is being challenged. Another brief example I want to share with you is that of an artist. His name is Bruno Serunkuma, and he's one of the artists, and he's also a lecturer at the Makerere University in Kampala, Uganda's capital, who embeds or uses his sculptures as a canvas. This is how he explains it, to tell stories, and those stories are meant for people to be understood, and of course they're encoded. So here too, I would argue that the artistic handicraft products in this case, the pottery products, are being a side of informal education, where in this particular example, I'm going to read out the quote in a minute, is supposed to create a moment of self-reflection among individuals to think about the possibility of contracting an HIV infection. So I'm jumping right into the second part of this quotation, where in an interview, Bruno tells me, so you go back in your home, you find the pot you cook from, there is a snake inside, in that pot. So what do? So I listened to a musician who was telling the story, and then I started composing and asking the same question. If you try to kill the snake because pottery is fragile, you may break the pot. He was leading that to HIV/AIDS. We contract AIDS through sex, yet sex is part of our life. Should we give away with sex? Should we kill the snake? What do we do? So by embedding stories like that, that are close to stories people know from home and can closely affiliate it with, Bruno here very purposefully uses his artistic production for educational purposes. Now, I said I do not only consider handicraft products, but also production sites as a site of informal global education. And I brought two very brief examples of where this could possibly be occurring. Now, throughout my research, I had a very important moment when I was confronted with two different narrations of the functions of copying that were perceived by some, as you can see in this quote here, by Nubanyanzi, who is an artist and someone who was very active in promoting empowerment, especially women empowerment through artistic handicraft production, who sees, who thinks, or who is convinced that if we see a handicraft artist to copy from others, it's because they, and I quote, they don't want to be creative. Now they think whatever they have seen, which has been popular, it's what they should copy instead of being inspired by that. Now, if you refuse to think because you have the ability to copy, then go ahead. So what we can see in this narrative is a very Western individualized focus on or conception of innovativeness and innovative thinking. Now, this perspective is very much challenged by the women that I have met with, which is why I brought this photo. This is a women's producers group. They do wicker work and they meet twice a week. What you can see in the background is the church. So we're officially on a churchyard. And this is a very important moment for them to work in public, because this is how they renegotiate gender roles, by being present in the public sphere. But in their perception, copying is not something that should be associated to a lack of innovation, but rather their conceptualization of copying is to say, well, we're not selfish in our knowledge, meaning we don't keep the knowledge to ourselves and innovate individually, but we share it with other people. Because we are unemployed women who decided not to just remain idle in our homes without any income. So here we see sort of a reframing of the meaning of copying, which puts or through which the women themselves position themselves as being agentic and taking on a proactive role in their life. And that in combination with the purposeful decision to work in public, for me, presents a very strong motive for an educative moment. And ultimately, and this is sort of the last example that I want to share with you, what I did find as well, that it's, those brief encounters where people from different collective or people from different social worlds meet and have those brief moments of encounters are actually also moments of informal education, also on norms and values. In this example, negotiating or sort of creating moments of reflection and learning about what values are considered to be pivotal for the creation of a costume that is essential in an initiation ritual for boys who transcend into adulthood. Now, in closing up my brief presentation here, what I wanted to sort of emphasize upon is that the findings from my own research, which again did not focus on education per se, but they do suggest for both artistic handicraft production and product to be important signs of non-formal and informal global education, because they facilitate very brief moments of cross-cultural encounters that are not necessarily directed and as such open for sort of spontaneous negotiations. At the same time, engagement therewith stimulates reflection on those notions such as aesthetics, culture and cultural heritage, norms and values. As you could have seen, and I sort of raced through that because I fear I'm about to run out of time. between poaching possibly. Is poaching okay? Under what extent is it okay? When is it okay for someone to hunt an animal, and where are the limits to that, and who gets to decide that? But also, they both of the products and the production side sort of facilitate the frictions between the traditional and the contemporary, and that are often presented as binaries. The empirical material suggests that there is no clear-cut difference here in the public discourse. Now, what I want to, of course, emphasize is that everything I presented here is not a systematic analysis. This is sort of me looking at the material with a somewhat different perspective, and hence it lacks theoretical underpinnings. Yet, possibly, it may be worthwhile to explore further. And with that, I want to thank you for your attention. If you want to know more about the actual research I did, I provided a link to the book that is published. It's open access. And I thank you for your attention.
Thank you all. I think it's been fascinating, as I said, using all these spaces and having this sort of non-formal dimension of learning, which I think is very important. I think in the current times, I think it's getting more important than ever before, that people sort of experience and feel, and then we connect that with discussion and dialogue and reflections, what we learn. And I think it has a lot to do with injustices. It has a lot to do with decolonization, as we understood. It has a lot to do with sustainability and feeling maybe the hope for the future, could we say as well. So thank you all for the excellent presentations, and I hope to see many of you again in the future webinars. And have a good continuation of the week and be inspired. Bye-bye.